All right, welcome back to Book Club. I hope you're all having a fabulous week. My name's Anita Voth, and I am your host today as we continue to interview authors from the WOW Collaborative Book Series. If you're looking for something new to read, I encourage you to go to the website, womanofworth.com, and order one of the 6 books available now in that series. You know, the weather is getting more beautiful, and it's the perfect time to grab a great book and sit outside and do some reading. And also to join us here on Book Club to get a little bit deeper with the authors. So thank you for joining us today. You know, over the last few weeks, we have been enjoying chatting with authors from a variety of the books from the WOW series. And all 6 books have become #1 bestsellers on Amazon. So we are super proud of that fact. So I just want to say a big thank you to all of the authors from all of the books, to our amazing publisher, Julie Salisbury from Influence Publishing, and of course her whole team that all make it possible, and Christine Aram, our fearless leader and the genius behind this idea. So cheers to all of you. So we would love to hear from you during this meeting. Feel free to raise your hand or use the little reaction button, or just unmute yourself and jump in with questions that you might have. And if you're watching this recording later, feel free to post questions you may have in the Facebook group, and we will do our best to get those answered for you as well. So today's guest contributed her chapter in book 3 of the series. That book was called Empower with the Power of Collaboration. You know, collaboration is a huge part of WOW, what WOW stands for. And as women, collaborating is super important for us to work together and have each other's backs. So let's welcome today's guest author, Mariah Jane Thies. Welcome.
Hello, and welcome to all the people watching today live and those of you that get to watch the recording. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. So, you know, after reading your chapter, I was once again in awe of how you and, many of our other authors too have been so vulnerable and open in sharing your stories. I know that initially that might not have been easy to just put all that out there, but it can be so helpful to others reading your story, because it kind of becomes kind of almost a guide for them to navigate their own lives sometimes. So, and there are, some of our viewers who may not have had the chance to read your chapter. So I'm wondering if you can just summarize briefly what your chapter is about.
Absolutely, thank you. I just wanted to say though too, when you mentioned about vulnerability,
Yeah.
the book came out in September and I got my box of books and whatnot. And the book was one of my main Christmas presents I gave to many people. And I will tell you, there was absolute, well, terror might be too strong a word, but close to send that book, say, to my sister, because she's in my chapter.
Yeah.
To send it to my aunt and other friends, because I was vulnerable, as you said. And, while no names were mentioned, it was vulnerable. And I thankfully only received positive feedback. So that was good.
Beautiful. So did you prep your sister in advance for what you wrote about her in the book?
No, I don't think I did, actually. I just said, here's something that I'm proud of and want to share with you.
Beautiful. And how did she receive it?
We haven't talked a lot about it. My aunt had actually, it was interesting. I guess if we get in the chapter more, my aunt had a little bit to say where she wanted to, I guess, almost defend my mom who's passed. And I was actually kind of going, you know what, that's not what this is about. This was about me telling my story.
Right.
That maybe now I can reframe my story. I think we can all reframe our stories as we grow past them, but the emotions and what it did for me and growing up and whatnot was still real. That going back to reframe it now doesn't change what the story actually was.
And I'm glad you brought that up, Mariah Jane, because I feel like a lot of times people who want to tell their story, that is probably one of their biggest fears, is outing someone in their story, or that it may come across that they're outing someone, but it's not their intention, right? It's about them. And you can have more than one truth in a situation, right? Your experience of your mother, for example, could be different than your sister's experience and both be true. So I love that you shared that, and hopefully that will encourage anyone who's thinking of ever becoming an author to be able to push past that and,
Yeah, I think
share
that's
their story authentically.
yes, I think that's a really important point, is just go, it's your story.
Yeah,
It's nobody else's story. It's your point of view. And so that's what
exactly.
this book did for me, is it gave me a chance to really clarify who I became. I was, I guess I'm going to say 2 years ago, because we continue to change.
Yes.
So your first question now, about sort
Yeah.
of encapsulating the whole story, there's kind of a few overarching themes. Of course, the big overarching theme was that I'm writing in a book about collaboration.
Right.
So my first part of it was actually that I didn't like collaboration. I grew up hating collaboration because, the socially acceptable reason was that I would say, my work ethic in school was such that if I'm put in a group with other people, I'm always doing the lion's share of the work because I was going to make sure it happened no
Right.
matter what. And so I always hated that, because I thought, this isn't, four of us working together. This is one of us dragging the other three along.
It's always like that, right?
Yeah, it often is. And I'm sure many people can relate to that. But when I started to reflect deeper about why I really didn't like it, because ironically, I was interested to share some of my story. And that was prior to knowing that the subject matter for this book was collaboration. So at first I kind of thought, maybe I'm going to do a cautionary tale about, not liking collaboration. But then as I started to dig into it, I went, you know what? No, this is an opportunity to unearth how did I get there, and to be really honest and authentic with myself first, and then of course to share it. And what I realized is that actually my aversion to collaboration was that growing up, I always had to, change who I was. So I did some really interesting research a couple years ago I'd like to share with everybody. I really encourage people to Google Carol Tuttle. So that's Tuttle.
Okay.
I came across her work. I don't even know how, one of those happenstances that you go, I'm so glad that happened.
Yeah.
And at that time, it was actually about what she calls dressing your truth. So like dressing with the right colors, but not just the colors like to match your hair or whatever, but to match your energy. And so she has these 4 energy types she talks about, of the highest moving down to the lowest moving. Well, I absolutely identify with that in my air energy type. So very high moving. Whereas my mom and my sister, growing up in the house with them, they're on the lowest scale of their earth energy. So it goes air, fire, water, earth.
Oh, water. Okay.
Yeah. And I'm air, and I'm all bubbly and bouncing around, matching these curls all the time. And it was interesting because part of growing up often seems to be about calming yourself, behave yourself, be quiet around the adults.
Especially back a generation ago, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that sense of just sort of suppressing your energy. And then mine went even further, that it was like that I was too much. So not only did I need to grow up, the actual act of growing up and learning to kind of control your energy and not to kind of come into a room and go bleh all over people, but that my mom and my sister were down here and I was here, and there was a mismatch. And that I was too much. And so if I wanted to get along with them, and sort of you could consider a home environment to be a collaboration, I needed to lower my energy. And now, of course, rewriting the story now, I know that they actually can't raise it. It actually was on my ability to lower.
Right.
And so I do that now in my adult life, where I go, okay, I'm being too much, and I can see my partner's a water, so he's 2 down for me. So I often have to, or I know I can totally exhaust him.
Yes.
But at the time growing up, I didn't know about any of this. So I just thought I was wrong. I was too much. So I was shutting things down a lot.
And I would think that's pretty normal in a lot of families, because I know my daughter is probably air as well. She comes in her room and everybody knows it, right?
Yeah.
Whereas my sons are probably earth. So.
Right. And it's just so interesting to kind of go, okay, I like my high energy, but it means in most situations, I'm the one that has to adapt.
But you're also the most fun at a party.
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to be the one to organize the party too.
Yeah.
Party's happening because of me.
Yes.
And actually my best friend next door was a lower energy, and thankfully she actually she fed off of it, but at home it was my mom wanted a really quiet house,
right,
and that wasn't me. So I'd often need to leave the house. I even moved out of the house at 17 to free my energy. But again, I didn't know
Right.
that's what was going on.
Right.
And so sort of to carry on with the story about everything suppressing, by the time I was 18, I'd been out of the house, had some pretty twisted views, but I didn't know they were twisted. I would still say I think my parents raised me well. But one of the other big rules, I guess, one of the biggest rules we talk about, the golden rule, you know, do unto others as you'd have done to you. I kind of got it twisted, possibly because of this need to lower my energy to get along.
Right.
There became a real sense of responsibility of who I am so much affects others. And that kind of got even balled in with that me being really outgoing, whereas my sister was much more introverted and stayed at home, didn't make a lot of friends, got really bullied. That there was sort of this, instead of do unto others how you have done to you, was look how you made your sister feel. And I got really conditioned to go, it's my responsibility how other people feel.
Right.
And I think I'm still struggling with that now, to go, how do I know that I'm being kind and aware of my actions, but it doesn't mean I'm responsible for how somebody feels.
Right.
And I think that's a dance that we all play, maybe consciously, I hope, our whole lives, is
I think
not
especially
my
as women,
responsibility,
right?
but I care. Pardon me?
Especially as women,
Oh,
as we're caregivers by nature, well, I'll say in general, but
yes, absolutely. And so it felt like I was being very feminine, very kind, and a good family member, a good sister. And then when I moved into the teaching world, I'm the one creating the environment for my students. So I absolutely do take responsibility for how they're feeling.
right.
So it got really mashed up and really kind of twisted. So when I was 18 and my father was killed in a plane crash while fighting a forest fire, I wasn't equipped to deal with that grief in any way.
Right.
Not equipped at all. My sister, with a job opportunity with her husband, they moved away within a month. They moved to Halifax. We were in Victoria. They could not have been further away. I moved back home to look after my mom, who was devastated, absolutely devastated, to the point of being somewhat suicidal. And I would have to call in sort of sick from work, kind of saying, I can't leave my mom alone today. And what that really meant is I'm now caring for my mom. And I knew that my energy, even me wanting to be, you know, maybe today I'd like to be a bit more optimistic or higher energy, I had to suppress that. And I know that I possibly even consciously chose that now is not the time for my grief. I need to take care of my mom.
Right.
And so I just kind of put it on a shelf, put it away. Or as I now know in my body, my liver, I believe in the whole Chinese medicine, my liver went, we'll take it, we'll just store it for you, you'll deal with it later.
Right.
Or you won't until your body says,
Until we force
now
you.
are. Yeah. So I got even further into the old I'm caretaking how other people feel, which again is actually quite the aversion to wanting to be in collaboration. It's exhausting to be in a group, whether it's 2, 3, 10, where you're caretaking how everybody's feeling and constantly modulating yourself, yet trying to be the energy that moves it along. It was hard.
Exhausting.
It was really hard. Very exhausting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then becoming a dance teacher, that was my goal, and I lived that dream. But further embedding into that suppressing who you are, suppressing your energy and all that, is that in dance, the show must go on. And I agree with that if you're on a stage. Not such a good way to live your life, though, which is the show must go on no matter what's going on. So I could be performing and be in absolute pain, you know, let's say the proverbial ballet dancer with their toes bleeding, but nobody knows.
Right.
You know, part of my training was, we don't want to know if you're in physical discomfort.
Right.
It comes with the territory.
Yeah. So what does that ideal have effect on children, right?
As a dance teacher now, I'm extremely aware that I don't want to have done to them what was done to me.
Right.
And then on top of that, there's always that leave your baggage outside the door. When you're coming into class, it's just you. And I go, well, honestly, that's not how we make artists. We make artists by showing up who you are. And if today I'm emotional, how can that be infused into my dancing to make me a true dancer? Well, that didn't happen during most of my training either. So there was a family suppression, then there was a career suppression of whether physical or emotional discomfort, really. And pretty unhealthy. But again,
Yeah.
I thought I was coping really well because my high energy was still there and everybody would just still see that I'm looking upbeat.
Yeah. I mean, especially I would say a generation, I'm not sure how old you are now, but my parents' generation and when I was a child generation, that was common, right? You don't share your problems with people. Everything has to look a certain way, right?
So, well, my mom was British as well, so the British
Oh,
stiff
there you
upper
go.
lip thing. And she was
Yeah.
very big on survival mentality and coping. So I think even if I were to have that discussion with her today, like I said, she's passed, but if I were to have that discussion with her today, she would probably still be proud that I survived.
Right.
That I put on my survival face. And I kind
Right.
of go, yeah, but if I'm authentic, then I can thrive. And there's a difference. And that we really
Yeah.
are people that do this. And that's normal, that's okay, that's natural.
Well, and I love that all of these circumstances in your life have led you to grow and, become authentic instead of the opposite, which happens to many people. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger idea, right?
Well, actually, my mom, again, here I'm slagging on my poor mom a little bit, but I remember though when I went through the next set of circumstances that sort of really got me was a divorce, theft of my business, became bankrupt, homeless, even my cats died. Like it just everything.
Mhm.
And she was still alive at the time, and she said, you're being tempered like steel. That they keep
Mhm.
you're getting put in the heat to keep getting stronger. But
Right.
again, that was still her wanting to have that survival mentality.
I guess
And
there's a positive strongness and then there's a be strong no matter what and don't show it, right?
well, what I'm trying to work on now, some of my newest learning is that resiliency is what strength is.
Hmm.
Rather than strength having that sense of resistance that it doesn't matter what comes at me, you can't knock me over. But the
Right.
resilience is like, I'm back and I'm back. Um, from a place of always being able to adjust and adapt and all that. So I think I'm
It
getting
reminded me of that song, the fight song. You know the fight song? You have to
fights.
look it up. It's a great song. It's called the fight song.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
All
that
right.
brings me to another point. I don't know
Okay.
if we have time, but
Yep.
when you say fight, the old me, and that means even just only a couple years ago, I would have thought of aggression and not have
Right.
liked that and going, but I want to be nice and I'm caretaking other people's feelings and you don't fight. And it was actually not until again about 4 years ago I got very ill, was ultimately diagnosed with fibromyalgia, which my mother had, of course.
Okay.
But I didn't take that line down, so to speak, and I kept fighting to get my health back, which I did. But during that time, my wonderful partner was there, really supportive of me.
Mhm.
Yet some of his friends thought that I was taking advantage of him and all that sort of thing. And that just blew my mind, couldn't be further from the truth. And it actually made me angry. And that was a turning point in my life where I went, wait a minute, I'm trying so hard to put this out here that I'm this person and you still misjudge me? And I went, oh,
Mm.
and so actually that fight in me, that anger in me is actually, I think, one of the biggest keys that I found on my journey, say the last 5 years, was anger. Let's say even anger of my father's death isn't bad or wrong. It just means your boundaries were crossed. And let's
Right.
just be clear on our boundaries. And that's been my latest work that I'm doing, is working on boundaries.
I love that. There was a line that you wrote in your chapter that you just kind of talked about that when you first felt that anger, and then you realized, well, if people are going to misjudge you anyway, you might as well be yourself, because if you were
Absolutely.
not being yourself and it wasn't making you happy, then you might as well, right?
You might as well. What have you got to lose? Yeah, if they
Yeah,
don't like you when you're putting on this face, this mask,
yeah,
well then take it off. Maybe they'll like you, maybe they don't, but at least you're being you now. And there's
exactly.
I mean, it's obviously so much healthier on every single level to just be authentic. I
Right.
can still be aware of how I'm affecting people, but that doesn't mean I'm changing my authentic self. And it might mean then that you're not somebody I'm going to spend a lot of time with. If I'm actually too much for you, well, okay,
Yeah.
I'll hang
Well,
out with people that I'm not too much for.
and I think that is the key. People think, oh, I'm going to be myself, and it doesn't matter how I show up because that's myself. Whereas the key, like you're talking about there, is you can still lower your energy if you need to in a room because that's going to get you the best result with those people, and you are aware of them, and you can still be yourself
Yeah,
in the middle of that, right?
absolutely. And so now I just feel like I've got access to my little dial, and
Okay.
I just sort of let my intuition, sometimes more conscious, but to just know where I need to be, whether I'm taking a leader role or more of the collaboration role where we're all equal parts, or
Mhm.
like I said, with my partner who's a low energy, sometimes he likes me bringing him up, and other times it wouldn't be appropriate for me to bring him up. I can go
Right.
down to meet him, and that's better.
Beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful. So maybe you've probably answered this question somewhat in our just dialogue just now, but what motivated you to write this chapter maybe at this time in your life, or at that
Great.
time, because it was
Yeah.
2 years ago?
Yeah. Great question. And probably to go back to my mom and her statement of you're being tempered like steel. And
Mm,
I was kind of going, I've been through so many losses, ultimately loss of just about everything at one point. And I go, it's got to mean something. It
right.
has to mean something. And as a teacher by nature and profession, I go, okay, well, it has to be that I'm supposed to be an authentic inspiration to others for them to learn from it. So therefore, I
Mm,
got to share it and go, if we all quietly go through our pains, then nobody can learn from our pain and perhaps avoid it. Now,
right.
I do think I couldn't have learned all my life lessons just from a book, but
Unfortunately, that's
no,
true.
unfortunately, yeah, otherwise you'd be like, what's the book to read to
Yeah,
avoid all
give
that?
me the book.
Give me that book. But I do think it can be a guidepost for other people, So if I
Yeah.
read, so for instance, like People Loving Eat, Pray, Love, Elizabeth Gilbert's work, I'm
Yep.
so blessed that she wrote it because I go, I know she didn't write it for me, she wrote it for her, but to share it. And it was a guidepost at different times in my life to read a book like that. And so I would want
Mm,
my story to be a similar guidepost.
beautiful.
And
And I'm sure it is being that for many. So maybe you can share a little bit what's changed in your life since you wrote that chapter. I know that book was released in September 2 years ago, so almost 2 years ago now. So what's going on in your life these days?
well, so that came out in September. And in October, so just the month right after that, I met what became a colleague and currently sort of a boss, but still a colleague, where we had collaborations and I started seeing more of the world. So I'd always wanted
Hmm.
to travel a lot and I've been doing that. But with his connections over in China, I've now visited China 3 times and taught there. I visited Germany and Finland. I was just down in Australia. And so the collaboration on a more of a global scale, what the biggest change for me was going outside of just, the lower mainland to going,
Yeah,
I'm actually wanting to connect with people on a global scale, collaborate on a global scale. And it's like the world is big and really small at the same time,
yeah,
that
that's funny.
dichotomy.
Yeah.
So a lot of that, which of course the pandemic has kind of put a kibosh on in the last little while. So
Hmm.
actually the last few months have given me a chance to have more alone time than I've ever had my whole life, I think, and a lot more reflection time because of that. So I actually feel right now that there's even more pieces of healing that are coming up because of the alone
Mm.
time. So even if I don't put my mask on when I'm teaching or I'm out being a guest in someone's home in another country, I still tend to have I'm going to be good company, but being able to, because you
Yeah,
want to be
it's natural.
you want to be asked back, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's actually the biggest change, even just the last few months, is when I'm my own company and nobody else's, how my energy fluctuates. And I think
Right,
all of us, our energy perhaps fluctuates a lot more than we sometimes allow it to.
right.
I'm finding that. So I just say greater authenticity, yet more global collaboration, a lot of work on boundaries recently going, I can't, if I'm not responsible for how they feel, they're not responsible for how I feel.
Mm. It's a
That's
two-way
only
street,
fair.
right?
Yeah. And so therefore, if somebody's crossed a boundary of mine, I can't be upset unless I'm super clear that I was already previously clear on those boundaries.
Right.
You can't blame
Oh,
someone after the fact. So
that's
working on that a lot.
a huge light bulb, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes. So
So, maybe you can share what piece of advice would you give other women, maybe who are going through similar circumstances, or, I feel like there's a part of your story that touches all of us. in one way or another. So what piece of advice could you give to encourage them?
So when they're going through hardships,
Or to be authentic, or, you know, whatever.
I guess that would be it, is if I'm being authentic, then I'm also being authentic that we all go through hardships.
Yes.
And I think maybe the biggest piece would be not just the obvious ask for help, but to even just know yourself. You know, I think of it as, if we want to have a good friend, we have to be a good friend.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of almost toxic positivity out there of like, you've got this, girl. And I really wish that somebody, say 10 years ago, had said, you look like you've got it, but I'm not so sure. Can I help you? And that might have peeled the layer back a whole lot sooner. And so I almost want to say, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but to say, to maybe call bullshit on yourself and those you care about, to kind of go, are you really okay? I can handle it if you're not.
Yeah.
I can handle it if you're not. It doesn't mean I'm solving it for you, but I'm listening. And therefore, if you can do that for others, then you can do that for yourself. So a lot of journaling, that's been huge. And my last piece that I think transformed me the most, that's the advice I'd give, is go for a walk around the block by yourself, like, you know, after dinner or whatever.
Yeah.
And I found that when I talk to myself, probably looking like the crazy lady walking around the block, that's when I get in my flow. I actually find I get more flow and more authenticity than when I'm journaling, because the act of the moving, of walking.
Right.
Then I get real with myself, and then I can go be real with others.
That's great advice. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mariah Jane, for joining us today and for sharing your story again and letting us go a little bit deeper with you. I really appreciate that. So if anyone wants to get in touch with Mariah Jane, you can go to awomanofworth.com and you will see all of our books there. Just click on the book that she was an author in, which is this one. So Empower with the Power of Collaboration. And doesn't she match the book so beautifully today? So just click on that book and you will find the contact information for all of the authors of that book there as well. So thank you again, Mariah Jane, for being with us today and for sharing. Also, if you are interested or ever thought perhaps you would like to be an author in a #1 best-selling book, 2 weeks ago we had Julie Salisbury on the show, or in book club, I should say, and she was kind of giving us a sneak peek that WOW will be inviting authors soon for book 8. And I'm happy to announce that that day has now come, so applications are open for book 8. The title of that, or at least the working title right now for that book, will be Post-Pandemic: Igniting Purpose, Power, and Passion. I think so much has come as a result of this pandemic, changes in our lives and maybe new realizations of things that we are capable of. So if you have a pandemic story and we are looking for co-authors. Our track record, again, is remarkable, as we've brought all 6 of the collaborative book series to #1 bestseller on Amazon. And it's only been 3 years. So book 7 is currently being worked on and will be released, I think, later in September as well. So we've got lots of exciting things coming up. So again, thank you for joining us today on Book Club, and join us again next week as we continue to interview more authors from the series, and feel free to spread the word to your friends to join as well. So I'm just going to end this week's club meeting with a favorite quote from Mariah Jane, and that is a quote from Mary Ann Williamson. I think many of us are slightly familiar with this quote, but you know, reading it again, it just hits home. It's just so perfectly said. And she says this: we ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, or fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. So thank you, Mariah Jane, and we hope to see you again in the future on Book Club. So
thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Have a great day, everyone, and enjoy being so fabulous.
Cheers.
Cheers.